maybe it was reference to
Oh, she picked up that.
The job security wasn't like an accident. Find somewhere to land in order to no, he did.
Yeah.
If everybody could take a seat, I know that the folks from EPA and DEP are anxious to get started, so you're welcome to come down front or sit wherever you're comfortable, but would like to begin. You all set? Welcome to the OLIN Chemical Superfund Site public meeting. My name is Michael Kyler, and I'm the town manager of Wilmington, and I'm pleased to welcome all of you here, and especially the officials from the Environmental Protection Administration, as well as the Department of Environmental Protection, who will facilitate this particular meeting. I do want to indicate that back in 2006, the Board of Selectmen recommended that the OLIN chemical site be designated as a Superfund site, and in fact it was listed on the National Priority Site back in April of 2006. And in June of 2007, EPA reached a voluntary settlement agreement with OLIN Corporation and other companies associated with that site. Today we are here because EPA and the Massachusetts DEP are going to provide everyone in the community who is interested an opportunity to ask questions, as well as for them to listen to any community concerns about any of the environmental issues related to this particular site. I just want to acknowledge that there are a number of town officials who are here, and if I miss anybody, just please let me know. Included are Selectman Charles Fiore and Selectman Lou Samaglia. I'm pinch hitting for the Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, Mike Newhouse, who just an hour or so ago was expected to be here but had a professional situation, work obligation situation come up, and he's still hoping to get here at some time, but right now he's stuck in the office. Okay, I'll try to speak up a little louder. I also want to acknowledge that the town, as many of you know, have engaged the services of GeoInsight, our environmental engineering consulting firm, and Mike Webster and Joel Trefillo are here in the event that people have any questions pertaining to the town. They are representing the town, they're the town's experts on all issues related to OLIN. In addition, Beverly Shea is here, who is the chairperson of the Conservation Commission. Jeff Hull, the assistant town manager. Greg Erickson, who is the director of public health. Rob Antico is here, the assistant superintendent of the water and sewer department. Winifred McGowan, who is the assistant director of planning and conservation. And also Ed Loud, who is a member of the Board of Appeals. I also want to welcome and recognize two gentlemen from the city of Woburn, members of the City Council, Jim Dwyer and Michael Raymond. And look out, I don't think I missed any town officials. If I did, I apologize. But now to really to the substance of the meeting, I would like to introduce Jim DiLorenzo, the project manager from EPA. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to talk really loud. I have 3 young children, so I can project pretty well. If you can't hear me, please raise your hand. I also want to acknowledge that there is a representative from Jim Maselli's office here tonight, too, who introduced herself to me. My name is Jim DiLorenzo. I'm a remedial project manager with EPA's New England office. We're out of Boston. We manage all Superfund sites in the New England states. With me tonight from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection is Joe Coyne and Tom Mayen. Joe works in the hazardous waste program at Mass DEP, and Tom works in the drinking water program. I've asked them to come tonight and help answer any questions that you folks may have. Also with me tonight from Nobis Engineering, our consultant who will be overseeing this project moving forward, is Heather Ford, Nobis's project manager, and Amy Adams from Nobis. So with that, I will get into the substance of the presentation. I would ask, I'm going to take about 20-25 minutes, and then Joe Coyne is going to talk a little bit specifically about groundwater. And then in the back of the room is Sarah White, who's our community relations coordinator for EPA. And she's going to say a couple of words about community relations. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers. We'll stay here as long as it takes to try to answer everyone's questions. And what I want to emphasize is really the purpose of tonight's meeting. Under the Superfund program, we need to develop a community relations plan. The Superfund program is very interactive. I try to be very transparent. We take community concerns very seriously. And when we get to the point of reaching a cleanup, and we're certainly not there, we're far from it, when we get to the point of reaching some decision on cleanup, there is a very formal hearing process, and community input is a serious criteria that the agency must consider in selecting the final cleanup plan. So we're at the start of that process, and in reaching that goal, we need to develop a community relations plan. So we want to hear from folks after the presentation on what some of your concerns are. Certainly over the past year and a half, I've met numerous members of the community, and some of the, I've heard numerous concerns, and I appreciate that. Up on this board, we put some of the issues that we've already heard, kind of just to spark interest at the end. Superfund regulatory process concerns, community and health concerns, Drinking water and groundwater, obviously a big concern. And then we have our catch-all category. So at the end, we'll try to populate these categories and make sure we capture all of the concerns that we hear tonight. So with that, I will ask Amy to continue the agenda again. Take about 30 to 40 minutes. Please hold your questions till the end. Go ahead, Amy. So I want to talk a little bit about the operational history. The OLIN site itself is located on Ames Street. It's in a small commercial area off of Main Street. The facility operated from 1953 to 1986. Prior to 53, that was undeveloped property. The facility was used to manufacture chemicals for the rubber and plastics industries. So it was a manufacturing facility. And really the primary environmental problems stemming from that property are from the discharge of liquid waste into lagoons and ponds that were located previously on the property. During their operation, all the liquid effluent was discharged into these lagoons, which were basically just man-made depressions dug into the ground, and the chemicals over time leached out. That was not only acceptable practice at the time, it was permitted and regulated as such at the time. So that's just the way, you know, those types of facilities operated in the 50s and 60s, and finally in the early 70s we figured out, well, when you put this stuff in the ground, it's not okay. So in the early 1970s, the lagoons were cleaned out. They were lined, which means plastic was put on the bottom of them, HDPE, a heavy polyplastic, and then they would continue to be used, but instead of allowing the chemicals to leach into the ground, they were cleaned out periodically. So that was better. And then around 1980, you know, sewers became more prevalent for discharge like that. The calcium sulfate landfill was created when the lagoons were lined. So once again, the waste continued to be discharged to the lagoons. Periodically, they'd come in and dredge them, and they created this landfill on the southwest corner of the property, and it's now referred to as the calcium sulfate landfill. That's just a real brief operational history. Regulatory history. And this is probably going to be the shortest regulatory history you'll ever see, because this site has a long regulatory history, but just wanted to hit on a couple of real key points. In 1993, Massachusetts DEP designated the site as a Tier 1 under their Mass Contingency Plan. That's their hazardous waste statute, Chapter 21E. And what's the significance of that? Well, as a Tier 1 site, basically it means the property really got their attention. There was oversight at the state level, and things began to really happen in terms of trying to figure out the extent of contamination, performing some type of cleanup. So, you know, there's a long history of work at the site. Following that, the site was added to the NPL, as Mike mentioned, in 2006, about 2 years ago. The EPA Superfund program is an enforcement-first program. What that means is that EPA strives to get the parties who are responsible for the contamination to pay for the investigation and cleanup. So when the site was added to the NPL, our first task was to negotiate a settlement with those responsible parties. In this case, the responsible parties include OLIN Chemical Corporation, because they own the property. They still own it today. They took over ownership in 1980. They operated it for 6 years. So they're both an owner and an operator under the liability scheme. And then two previous owners also signed the settlement agreement. Those were Built Right Corp. And Stepping Company. And so that settlement took about a year to negotiate. And what we have now is what we call an AOC, or Administrative Order of Consent. Basically, that's a legal document explaining what the settlement and the terms of the settlement are. And then we have what we call an RIFS SAO, What that means is remedial investigation and feasibility study, statement of work. Basically, that's the technical document that lays out the framework for continuing site studies and working towards developing a cleanup plan for the site. So those two documents together constitute the settlement. And again, it requires the PRPs, their consultants, MacTech is their current consultant, actually continues to do the work with EPA and Novus Engineering and Mass DEP overseeing the work they do. We have to review and approve all the documents. We have to approve any studies they want to perform, and again, they pay us to do that. It's not an agreement to clean up the site. This agreement takes us to the point of selecting a cleanup plan. Does not include the PRPs paying for the physical cleanup. That will require a second negotiation when we get to that point. At this site, there is a long history. Like I said, it was a Tier 1 site starting in 1993. And in fact, investigations even predated that back into the early 1980s. A lot of removal type cleanup work has occurred. They've removed tanks and drums that were left on the property following closure of the manufacturing facility. They excavated the lagoons, including the Lake Poly area, shipped that material off-site mostly. They constructed a treatment plant on site, a plant called Plant B. It's in the former location of a tank farm that was Tank Farm B. That treatment plant was designed to recover oil that was floating on top of the groundwater and seeping out into the east ditch. That oil we call light non-aqueous phase liquid, hence the term LNAPL you see there. And that was constructed in 1980 and continues to operate today. Certainly the majority of the oil has been collected, but there's still some oil floating on top of the groundwater there, so that plant continues to operate today. More recently, probably the most recent activity they've performed is they constructed what we call a slurry wall and cap area on pretty much the mid-west side of the property. And what that is basically is a containment structure. It's attempting to contain the most contaminated groundwater found to date from migrating further off the property. Obviously, contamination has already migrated well beyond that, but by constructing this slurry wall, which is simply a 3-foot thick concrete wall built from ground surface, keyed down into bedrock, and it just physically contains the groundwater from moving out further. So it's a source control measure, and that was completed around 2001 or 2. So, and then finally there was an agreement to maintain the southern half of the site. The site's roughly 30 acres, roughly half of it's wooded. It's never been developed. It's now been put into a conservation easement, so it never will be developed. And so I think that's significant as well. So there's been a lot of actions that have been done to date. There have also been a lot of studies completed to date. Basically all the media have been looked at some point to some extent. There's been soil sampling, there's been groundwater, sediment. There's even been some air testing, even though I don't have it on the slide. And what you see here are some of the primary contaminants that seem to show up with the most frequency. A lot of them probably look familiar: chromium, ammonia, sodium sulfate, OPEX and Chempor, they're trade names. They actually have chemical constituents that make, that they're made up of. Trimethylpentenes, BEHP is ethyl, bis-2-ethylhexyl phthalate, and NDPA and nitrosodipentylamines, and DMA and nitrosodimethylamine. Contaminants are pretty similar across the various media. So why do we have to continue studying the site if there's been so much work done to date? The problem becomes obvious when I get through some of these slides. I'll show you, that a lot has been accomplished, but there still hasn't been a holistic, comprehensive look at the overall problem, and that's what we need to have happen. And that's what the Superfund program does. And just very quickly, this graphic depicts, the Superfund process. Discovery of a new site, that's when the state calls us and says, hey, we have a problem here. We want to refer it to EPA. We need your resources to look at it. That happened 2004 or 5. We evaluate the site to make sure it's eligible for Superfund resources. That determination was made sometime in 2005. I think it was September 2005. Then we moved forward to add the site to the national priorities list. That was done in April of 2006. And this roughly 12 to 1,300 Superfund sites nationally. OLIN Chemical is actually the newest one in New England. Most of the sites, a site's added maybe every 3 or 4 years. That's the current frequency at this point. And then at the same time we're working on listing a site, we also go out, like I said, enforcement first. We go out and try to identify the potentially responsible parties, or what I prefer to call responsible parties. We do that concurrently. In fact, we did that here. And that brings us to where we're at now. Study the type and extent of contamination and evaluate options. And that should really be a very big circle, because all these other circles took us about 2 years to get to where we're at. This big circle of studying and evaluating takes several years, and we're going to be there, looking at the site probably for 4 or 5 years overall. Some parts of it will certainly move quicker. Groundwater is certainly a complicated issue. I expect that to take several years. But at some point, we'll reach a proposed cleanup plan. I expect there'll be multiple cleanup plans for this site. There'll probably be one for soil, probably be a separate one maybe for surface water and sediment, certainly a separate one for groundwater, and they'll all be reached at their own pace. But when we propose that cleanup plan, once again, that's a very critical part for the community. We need to hear from folks at that point as to whether you like the cleanup plan, whether it's appropriate for the community, and there'll actually be a formal hearing and a written comment period at that point in time. So we're just starting to build up to that point. And then once we consider community comments and any other written comments from our state counterparts, then we select the final cleanup plan. So it's kind of an unwieldy process, but I've been with the Superfund program for 20 years. It does work. We do reach appropriate cleanup plans. That's the process. Under the settlement, what's been done to date? So far, we have received what we call an interim response steps work plan. Purpose of that document was that we had this Plant B that was already in operation and needs to continue to operate. We have the slurry wall and cap area, which even though it's physically constructed, it requires a certain amount of groundwater monitoring to make sure it's operating effectively. And maintenance of the cap over it. There's a plastic cap over it. Make sure that stays intact to minimize the groundwater infiltration into that area. So those things, as well as there's a pilot study. This term DAPL is dense aqueous phase liquid. I think many of you are familiar with that. Basically, what is that? It's really contaminated groundwater that's sitting at the bottom of the aquifer. And a couple of years ago, I believe in 2003, OLIN had proposed a study on trying to extract that because it's so contaminated and because its physical properties are somewhat different than regular groundwater. It's kind of a thicker, heavier groundwater. They need to study the viability of extracting that out of the ground to see how it will react under pumping conditions with the objective of doing full-scale remediation down the road. So this is a pilot with one well that we put in on Jewel Drive. They started looking at that before the Superfund listing came along. So those 3 items kind of didn't fall within the Superfund process. By having this work plan, it allows the agency to review and approve how they move forward with those items. We have that document. It's substantially reviewed at this point. We're still looking at some Plant B issues and a couple of issues under the DAPL pilot. We then asked them to produce a focused remedial investigation report. By focused, it's about 6 feet thick. capturing all the data collected to date at the site, so that we have a better understanding. We know we're entering this project, and we've entered it, not at square one, because there is a lot of data, as I indicated on the previous slide, but certainly not where we need to be to believe that we fully understand the site. So they've created this document that kind of summarizes all the existing data, studies and cleanups that they've completed to date. And like I said, it's a very voluminous document, that's the term. And we've substantially reviewed that. The information from that will feed into a work plan to complete the study under the Superfund program. That work plan is expected this summer. That'll be distributed to the community through the library, through the community group, and we'll talk more about that at the end for review and comment. And then also under the settlement, the parties, OLIN and the other two parties, are required to submit semi-annual status reports. They submitted the first one in January, the next one will be due in July, and that's just a summary of any data they take for monitoring, summary of the day-to-day activities at the site. So those are kind of the, what's been done to date. And so what have we learned about the site? What have we learned about all this data? Well, again, this is the study area. When we say site, we don't just mean the Ames Street property. We mean anywhere and everywhere where there's contamination. We know the groundwater contamination extends off to the west. It's impacted the Maple Meadow Brook aquifer, knocked out the town wells in 2003. That's obvious, that we know. We know there's contamination that comes down the east ditch and extends possibly down into the New Boston Drainway. That's a little fuzzy, as I'll show you in a moment. And there's also questions about how far groundwater contamination may extend in other directions, maybe a little bit to the north, certainly to the south. We need more data. So I'm going to walk you through a series of slides. Now these are figures, and these figures are out back on poster boards. So you're not going to be able to see the detail up here, but I just wanted to put them up for talking points. So if you will, Amy. So these figures are all from that focused remedial investigation report. Again, they're all blown up and outside if you want to look at any one of them after the meeting. But the first one looks at surface soil samples. And what becomes immediately obvious are a few things. First of all, the sampling was targeted to the known release areas. The dots on there represent sample points. And when they say surface, they mean 0 to 3 feet. We typically think of surface as 0 to 1 feet, but basically the superficial soil. And so anywhere there's a dot, there's been a sample taken. And again, the dots are all pretty much targeted to where the former lagoons were and where releases were expected. That's not to say, though, that contamination wasn't transported by flooding conditions or wind dispersion to other areas. So we need to kind of fill in the blanks here, and that's what we'll be looking to do moving forward, is filling in some of those areas that are void of data right now. Under building foundations, there's really been no sampling under the former manufacturing area. You can see the outlines of those buildings. Most of those buildings are gone. There were leach fields, there were underground storage tanks. A lot of that area has not yet been characterized and needs to be. Also, with each one of these dots, what was sampled for varies. Many of the dots represent samples for ammonia and sulfate only. Well, we need to know about trimethylpentenes. We need to know about NDMA. We need to know about potentially solvents that were used at the facility, like trichloroethylene or PERC. Things like that. We need to have a better understanding spatially the extent of those other contaminants. So some contaminants are well represented, others not so much. And so what does it all boil down to is basically we need more surface soil data. There is a lot of good data and we'll be able to use it, but we do need to fill in the blanks. Likewise with subsurface soil data, very similar in terms of coverage. The density seems like it's greater in some areas, but again, when you're talking subsurface, you're talking 3 feet down the bedrock, 3 feet to 80 feet. So again, how much data is really from 3 to 10 feet or 10 to 20 feet? Spatially, that becomes important when you try to evaluate risk and assess extent of contamination. And then the same question about, well, how many of the, how many of the samples were only for 2 or 3 constituents, as opposed to the greater list of constituents that we need to look at. And those are the types of issues that we're getting our arms around, and they'll be captured moving forward as additional field work. On property sediment, again, there's been sampling. A lot of the data top there looks at the Lake Poly area. There's also been sediment sampling in the South Ditch, which is down towards the bottom. And if you'll flip to the next slide. And then off-property sediments continuing the South Ditch down into the East Ditch, New Boston Drainage Way, all the way down the Halls Brook. Been a little bit of sampling. I think we need more data in those areas. Over in Maple Meadow Brook itself, there's actually a Maple Meadow Brook. And there's also another, I forget the name of the other brook. There's 2 brooks in that area that have had, I think, a total of 3 or 4 sample points. We need a little better understanding of what's going on over there. So there'll be more data collected in that area. Didn't even bother showing you surface water on any of these slides, because the surface water by nature is mobile. I mean, surface water data is probably good for maybe a couple of seasons. Most of the surface water data here is 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. It's really not representative of current conditions at all at this point. So that'll need to be updated, so I didn't even put a graphic up for that. Extended groundwater contamination. I don't know if you can see that magenta or purple colored outline, kind of a random outline. It's dashed up in the northeast corner. That represents, based on the current understanding, the extent of groundwater contamination. And really, I'm not sure how accurate that is anymore, because the town wells were taken offline in 2003. They pumped a tremendous amount of groundwater, obviously. How have the hydraulics changed now that that influence no longer exists over in the Maple Meadow Brook aquifer? That needs to be looked at a little further. There was some sampling in 2003 and 4 to look at that, but more data is needed in that area. It's dotted up in the top, or dashed up in the top right corner to indicate maybe the contamination extends a little further to the north and east. Need to look at that as well. And I also think it should be dashed, basically that whole eastern boundary. We need to fine-tune really how far that line goes over to the east and down to the south. When you get down to the south, they show it sort of following Landfill Brook almost down in there. I'm not sure if that's truly the true extent. So, yeah, there's been a lot of data collected. We definitely need more data. And then all of that information will feed into a risk assessment, and that'll determine where specific cleanups are needed. And from there, we'll go into the FS process, the feasibility study, and start to talk about cleaning it up and how we're going to do that. So like I said, we're a while away from that. But while we're on the issue of groundwater, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Coyne. He's going to talk a little bit about watershed, because this feeds into the risk assessment for groundwater. It becomes a key issue. Joe?
In 1990, an aquifer protection study was conducted by IEP for the town of Wilmington, and some of the information that basically came off of that, if you look at this sketch for a moment, you see sort of the cross-hatched area, that's the Ipswich watershed, and some of it goes right into the OLIN property, and south of that, where the majority of the OLIN property is the Abidjan watershed. So really the property itself sort of is between 2 watersheds. Based on this, groundwater on the northern part of the property has a tendency to flow more towards the north and east, and groundwater on the south of the property has a tendency to flow to the south. Now, EEP has classified the groundwater as GW1. Now, forgive me for the acronyms right now, but DEP classifies groundwater 3 different ways. It's GW1, GW2, or GW3. GW1 signifies current or potential drinking water, and that's the northern part of the site, and the southern part of the site, and GW2, excuse me, is is groundwater which has potential to leak vapors into buildings. GW3 consists of all groundwater that is in GW1 or GW2. Based on our assessment, the site's groundwater is GW1 for what is there at the northern part of the site, and also, as Jim had alluded to earlier, how groundwater how contamination has flowed towards the Maple Meadow Brook. Basically, one of the other reasons it's a GW1 as well is you can see this whole area is a Zone 2, and you can see the wells up there. A Zone 2 is basically an area, an aquifer that water from that aquifer can be pulled into a well, and that's a possibility when those wells were active and if they ever became active again. Basically, in summation, just to follow along what Jim said, the aquifer study and things that have been done in the past, this information needs to be updated. With the wells that have been shut down and situation out there now, we need to try to just update the information and really get a good, strong idea of what's going on there. Oh, and next, I'm sorry, it would be Sarah White from EPA, talk about community involvement.
And then perhaps we can see on the screen a little bit.
Is that better?
This is your last slide.
The hole in itself, right? Down too.
Unfortunately, my voice doesn't project very well, so I am going to use a mic. Can everybody see the slide here? This is the contacts for the site. This is the site team. So I'm going to leave this up, so if anyone wants to contact us at any time, if you have any questions, please feel free to do so. Just email us. Our email and our phone numbers are all listed. So they are also on the handout, the presentation handout that you received in the back. So,
Do you want the lights further dim? Are you okay?
I couldn't find it, Mike, yeah.
yes.
This is the last slide, so.
Last slide.
Yeah.
Do you want to do it to take care of it?
Yeah, just a little bit.
I'm thinking maybe we may have to refer to some of the slides when we get into the next section. As Jim had said earlier in opening, one of the motivations for having this meeting is to hear your concerns and capture those concerns for what's called the Community Relations Plan. And with any Superfund site, this is true of all Superfund sites across the country, we develop a plan for outreach as we move through the cleanup process. As you know, these processes are slow, they can take years. So we do that at the beginning of the cleanup, and it's basically just a strategy or a guide for EPA to use that's very site-specific, to community-specific, that we know what your community concerns are and how we can best reach you. So we look at key concerns like how does the community want to be contacted. What is do you prefer newsletters, fact sheets, press releases, public meetings such as this, or we can do even just smaller group meetings. We want to hear what your key issues of concern are. In September when we had the meeting, and recently we had a meeting of Wellington Mothers, we heard a lot of concerns about the groundwater and concerns that the drinking water supply was safe. and what the cleanup approach is for the site. And also during the Superfund process, we have, as Jim had mentioned, a formal requirement that we'll have a public meeting when the proposed plan is announced to take community input, and there'll also be a formal public hearing where people can supply either verbal comments or written comments to us that we have to take into consideration when we develop a cleanup plan for the site. But beyond that, we're not limited to that, so if any group would be interested in having us come and meet with them, we're available to do so. Having these public information meetings, I think, are a good way to reach people. So, like I said, we'd like to, as we move into the next activity, we'd like to hear how you would like us to reach you. And before I open up the brainstorming session, I'd like to also acknowledge some other people in here who have been very involved in the site. There's Martha Stevenson from WARC and Suzanne Sullivan. WARC is an acronym for the Wilmington Environmental Restoration Committee. And they just received, I think it was last fall, a technical assistance grant to help oversee help the community understand the technical aspects of the cleanup. And so Martha and Suzanne and Kathy Barry also are 3 points of contact for you. I'm sure many of you know these folks because they've been very, very active in the site. And also we have Christine Woltag from the Wilmington Mothers Group we met with recently, and she's got a great group of moms who are very interested and concerned about the site. So I also want to acknowledge Christine. So the next step, I think, Amy, if you want to, we're going to have a little brainstorming activity. We tried to put general categories out here for what your key concerns are, but we're certainly not limited to what we listed. There's a Superfund process, general community concerns and health concerns, drinking groundwater. I have another sort of general category of all other issues. And I'd also like to list maybe another panel for community outreach. We could, Amy? Thank you. So basically, this can be, sometimes can be answered as question and answer, or, okay, I'm going to turn it over to the audience. If anyone has any issues they'd like to raise. Yes, sir?
Yes, several questions. Maybe I can just ask them one at a time.
Okay.
Has your group done any research to find out the amount of people, if any, are on private drinking wells that are possibly affected by this contamination?
Okay, repeat the question. Has anyone studied the number of residents who are on private drinking wells that may have been affected by this contamination?
Yes. There are private wells to the south of the site, near the Woburn Town line. There's a neighborhood down there that's on private wells. And there are also private wells located around the outer edge of the Maple Meadowbrook Aquifer. I think those are the 2 areas we've identified so far. Under the state program, many wells have been sampled as recently as 2003, and for the most important contaminant of concern in drinking water, which is the N-nitrosodimethylamine. And I don't know offhand, I apologize, how many wells were sampled at that point. But there were a number of wells sampled, and the NDMA, and there were also other contaminants tested for, weren't found in any of the private wells tested to date. Now, here we are in 2008. We definitely need to look at that moving forward, but having NDMA data from 2003 provides some comfort, plus what we know from the monitoring wells, But we're not, I don't think there's a high probability that anyone is pulling this contamination into the private wells. But certainly, you know, that purple line, as I indicated before, isn't a fixed, rigid line. And with the town well shut off, we certainly want to go and look at that moving forward, and we're going to be doing that.
Wells that are still being used, and is it a potential for risk?
Yes.
And is this site here pretty much your full-time job, or do you have other sites that you're working on?
I have 2 other sites, but this dominates more than 50% of my time.
Can you tell us what the other sites are that you're working on?
Nyanza Chemical Superfund site in Ashland. It's an older site, it's been around since the early 80s. And the, the other one I can't even think of. The Silresum site in Lowell, which has also been around since the early 80s.
Okay, so none of you are working on the Tewksbury dump, that Superfund site?
Yeah, no, not familiar with that.
I'll tell you what's disturbing to me, because I'm hearing a lot of mumbo jumbo up there. And the last lady that just spoke said, you know, these things take a lot of time, they take years and years. And to have people that still have wells that are online, and to hear a comment like that, I think is unacceptable. And to me, it almost seems like there are people that are almost trying to make a career and retire off of just studying the site. And as a resident, I'm disturbed by that. I'm disturbed by the fact that we have people in town that have cancer. Our town has been noted as a town that's very high on its cancer cases. And you know, these meetings are nice, but I don't see how they're really showing us that there's been much effectiveness done in terms of study. What I understand when I was watching the meeting on TV, that there are 200 monitoring wells. Is that correct?
Something like that.
And would it be fair to say that those 200 monitoring wells are between the contaminated site and the well field, or are they all around it?
They're all around it. They go well beyond what the former well field was.
Do you think it's fair to say that those monitoring wells could have acted as conduits to allow the ground contaminants to actually migrate, leach, and actually funnel into the aquifer and further easily get into our groundwater?
No. I can comfortably say that's not the case, particularly here, because the predominance of the contamination is in that DAPL layer, that dense aqueous phase liquid layer, which is actually already at the bottom of the aquifer. So I think the issue you're raising is every time you put a hole in the ground, you're potentially creating a conduit for contaminants to move down.
Being in the drilling business and knowing what the nature of rock is, where it's cracked, people who drift down the sides of the highway in the winter, they'll see the frozen ice and the water coming out. And it's just the nature of rock to have seams to it and that sort of thing.
Right.
And it just seems to me that it doesn't take a whole lot of technical knowledge to think that that couldn't happen. And I'd like to know if we can have some type of information in the form of a data sheet with all the number of the wells, the depth to the bedrock, and that sort of thing. Is that producible?
Yeah, there's basically a drilling log for not every single, you know, for any well drilled in the past 15 years or so. There's a driller's log that shows, you know, that information. And, you know, when we put these wells in the ground, I can't speak for what was done historically here. I assume it was done correctly, but I can't say that off the top of my head. But, you know, we case those wells to try to prevent, you know, we install a steel casing as we install the wells to try to minimize the chance of cross-contamination from the upper layers to the lower layers. So there are, you know, certainly steps you take to try to minimize that. Again, in this case, the contamination is already at the bottom of the aquifer. But there, yes, that information is public. It's in that focused remedial investigation report. And the, you know, the well logs are all there.
I don't want to take a lot of time from other people's questions, but I just have two other things. We have a water line that's being called an emergency line. That's actually going through a Superfund site in Woburn. And at past meetings, it was told to us that this water line is actually going through a contaminated portion of land. And in people's minds, when they hear of a Superfund cleanup site, they think that it's getting cleaned up. But if the Woburn site was cleaned up, we wouldn't have a water line going through a contaminated piece of property. Our water line has been brought up to the point where it's 2 feet below the ground, which is a possible risk of freezing in the wintertime. Even the fact that it's being insulated. So what's disturbing to me is that people have in their minds that these sites are going to be cleaned up, but when you look at the Woburn site, it just seems like it's had a Band-Aid put on it, and it's really a joke. And the amount of money for technical review or assistance, and the amount of money that our government puts into Superfund sites, it's a joke. It almost seems like, you guys are just wasting your time and our time. When you first got up, Madam, you started speaking, you were saying, we're going to come up with a proposal, and then we're going to see how the community feels about that cleanup. Well, I don't know if anybody here is an environmental engineer, but it seems to me that there should be some type of benchmark or standard for a cleanup. It shouldn't, Joe over here shouldn't be saying, yeah, that sounds good to me when he doesn't know anything about contaminants. And I'd like to see something done in a more expeditious manner so that the people that have these wells that are still online aren't having kids getting cancer in our town, doesn't become just a cancer spot in the map of the world. That's all I have to say.
Well, let me just respond to a couple of points on that. I understand the frustration over time. These are long processes. If there were a way to come in and say, let's beam up all the contamination, we would. It's just not feasible, it's not practical. When people use the term cleanup, people envision someone in the ground with a shovel digging it up. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. A lot of times waste is capped in place, as was done in some portions of Industrialplex. Other portions it was dug out. And so you're right, when you say clean up this property, I'm not going to tell you it'll ever be pristine again. It'll never be pristine again. And the groundwater, no matter how quick our study moves, it's going to take decades to clean up, at best, with current technology. And that's the reality of it. It's unfortunate. So the best we can do is make sure that no one is exposed while we move forward. And certainly the residential wells, yes, key concern. They were sampled somewhat recently, 2003. They should be sampled again, and they need to be sampled continuously. Is it feasible to tie them into the public water distribution system? Do those people who own the wells want to be tied in? I don't know yet. That's something that we'll be, working through as we move forward. But I hear your concerns over time frame, and I could stand up here and tell you something that wasn't true, but these just take a long time to work through. There's a lot of issues. When it comes to community relations and cleanups, there are rigid criteria. These sites have to address risks. They have to. They have to meet all federal, state, and local requirements, both for how they're constructed and how they're built, but also to what standards they're cleaned up to. So there are rigid standards in place. I simply wanted to emphasize that it seems like a lot of times people feel like they don't have a voice in the cleanup plan. Here, Congress has told us the community does have a voice. It's one of 9 criteria that we need to look at when we clean up the site. First and foremost, though, it has to be protective of public health, address any risk, and meet all federal, state, and local requirements. Those we can't deviate from, can't waver from. Community relations is one of the other 9 that gets looked at. State acceptance gets looked at, and then the other 5 criteria all kind of balance or compare each other. There might be a criteria, a plan that says, well, let's cap this portion of the site. Another plan might say, let's excavate it down to 20 feet and dig it up if we can. So you're comparing those things and you're balancing of it. And it'll all be explained as we move forward, but again, it does take a long time. I'm not going to try to defend that. But we do our best to make sure no one is exposed as we're, moving forward. Not a rigid one, no. I mean, just my own experience, 5-6 years before we reach a cleanup plan, based on my own, I've been with the Superfund program since 1989. That's generally what it takes for a site with complex issues like this. Sometimes it's much longer, seldom is it quicker. I was hopeful that maybe this would be much quicker when this first landed on my lap because of all the data, but there's still quite a few gaps out there that need to be filled in. So I'm no longer sure it's going to be that much quicker. But all I can say is that, there are a lot of eyes on it now. And, we'll do our best to make sure no one, is, particularly with the private wells, but also, trespassing at the site. I mean, there are other exposure routes. We try to make sure no one, has any, exposure while this occurs. So, thank you.
How's the funding broken down? In other words, what percentage does OLIN pay versus EPA and other sources? And is any of that funding set aside so that, as you can see, we're rather skeptical, and we want to know what our current exposure is. Is there a process that we could send in a sample, an independent water testing facility that we could send a sample into our faucets to have some kind of reassurances?
Okay. The question, in case you didn't hear, is what's the funding breakdown for the site? And the second question is there a place where a property owner could send a water sample to have their own independent analysis? With regard to funding, this right now is being 100% funded by OLIN, American Built Right, and I always forget the third one, and Steppen. Those three companies are paying for any work, and they're paying for our time and our consultants' time. And I expect that to continue. That's what the agreement says. Until we reach the cleanup, then we have to negotiate a new agreement. And again, we will strive for the same thing, 100% funding by the responsible parties, and that's what we always strive for. And here we have it so far. With regard to drinking water, I may ask Tom to answer that. There are independent labs where you can send your own water to be sampled. I would ask that you contact us and ask what to have it sampled for. You want to look for the right contaminants. When you send, folks don't always realize when you sample groundwater, there's literally hundreds of things you can sample it for, and it gets very expensive very quickly, so you really want to target what the most likely constituents. Certainly NDMA would be one.
Is that the additive that was put in gasoline for water?
No, that's MTBE. Yeah, and that was found in some of the wells down in the Woburn town line. I understand back in the 90s from a gas station that was down there. And so that MTBE, of course, was prevalent, and now it's no longer in use. But we don't have an MTBE issue here.
Is that still monitored? I mean, even though we're not putting it any longer into the fuels?
Oh yeah, if we had, yes, if there was a history of it here, we'd be looking at it for sure. There's no, there's, like I said, there's a gas station spill, I guess, historically at some point on a small service station that used to be located on Main Street, but that's totally, separate than this issue here.
So do you have a phone number that we can call for a lab?
Yeah, I don't know, Tom, is there a list of private labs or?
Yeah, I mean, we have a state program where our state lab, which is called the Wall Experiment Station, certifies labs. But at a site like this, we're getting into some more exotic chemicals that aren't regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act necessarily. So it gets a little bit complicated, but I do have cards here. I can leave these cards if for any reason I leave before the end of the session. Come up and grab a card. If you email me, somebody who works with me, we can get you like a name of a lab. I mean, I think NDMA is one of the easiest things to get analyzed for because we're talking about parts per trillion. Years ago it's parts per million, it became parts per billion. Most things are still parts per billion. NDMA happens to be in the parts per trillion range, so 1,000 times lower than that. But there are different labs around the country. I don't know if the question had some implication who might pay for it. We at the state and the drinking water program, we regulate public water supplies, which tend to be 25 people or more, so we do not regulate private wells. And we also, wouldn't pay for those samples anyway. I don't know if there's any, as part of any remedial work, any potential way to pay for any of that through community involvement or anything. I don't know, was that part of the question who might pay for it, or was it just what lab could be used?
Well, both really. I think that you can hear a lot of skepticism
Sarah.
and through the fact that you say this is such a lengthy process, and that we know that these containment methods aren't 100%. What assurances do we have that we're not still getting, contaminated drinking water?
Right. And like I said, I mean, we don't want anyone exposed either. I personally don't, and the agency doesn't. And we know there may have been historic exposures to the drinking water supply. And matter of fact, the Department of Public Health is doing a study on that very issue that's separate than what we're doing here. We're moving forward. They're going back and trying to figure out, well, who may have been exposed and at what levels, and are there cancer clusters associated with that. And at my other site in Ashland, at Nyanza, they actually did find a link to the site. There was a cancer cluster in Ashland caused by people who were exposed to contaminated sediment. Kids who used to walk through this wetland every day, and they've actually gone and determined the link. And that's very hard to do. They're trying to see if they can do the same thing here from the drinking water supply. But not to get off cue, to get back to your original question, I mean, I could, if you're in the, are you in the immediate area, or do you have a drinking water well? Or? No. You just asking? Okay. Yeah, just curious. I mean, we will come out and sample, drinking water wells that are potentially impacted, and we're going to be doing that. It's been done historically. We're going to continue to do that. Basically, probably until the problem is resolved, which is going to be a long time. Groundwater it's not going to get cleaned up overnight. You can make progress, but a plume this big, it extends 3/4 of a mile, goes down on top of bedrock, probably in the bedrock. It's going to be a long time. So we'll be monitoring any private wells for a long time that are potentially impacted. If you just want to, as a private owner, have your own well tested, there are labs that will do that. I can't pay for that unless it's potentially impacted. But you said your real issue was independent. You wanted your own independent test anyway. And you can do that. There are labs, I don't know them offhand, but there are labs that do that, and it's not that unaffordable, it's fairly affordable. $100,
Jim,
$200.
can I just say something on that too? I mean, personally, I would recommend that if you collect any sample like that, you have professionals used to doing it, collecting a sample, because there are, very important preservation requirements, sample, which is very important.
And actually, just a good source is your local Board of Health for labs that are independent. So they're a good resource to go to. Yeah.
What would it take to put these houses impacted by putting on the town water? Is it a money issue? Maybe instead of doing all this activity, why don't we take them off the grid, put it in the town water, and just take out the wells?
The question was, why not just take all the remaining private wells and tie them into the public distribution system? If we find impacted wells, that would be probably the best solution. Right now, we're not aware of any impacted wells, and in fact, what we find at similar sites like this is if people have a well that's not impacted, they don't want it. They don't want to tie in. Matter of fact, when we find wells in some communities that we say are impacted, we still have property owners that don't want to tie in, even when we pay for the hookup because of the expense of the water itself. And that's understandable. But, to just go out and tie people in blindly isn't as good a solution as it sounds like. But generally, that's what would happen if we do find, an impact. And, yeah. Yeah.
It seems to me that if somebody has an impacted well, and the issue is money, they shouldn't ever have to pay for water again, my opinion. Okay. Have you ever had any experience with anybody having success going to the government and saying, look at, OLIN moved to my site, I have a private well that I didn't have to pay for water from, and you screwed me, now I'm having to pay you for my water.
No, that's a good, probably all heard that question, is why wouldn't the government or the responsible party, better yet, pay for the water if they have to tie in? In some cases they do. That does happen in some cases, but it's not, depends on the circumstances at the particular site. And like I said, hopefully we won't have to cross that road here. If we do, we will.
Jim,
Yeah,
to
sure.
clarify
Yeah,
that,
Mike.
that happened. I mean, that OLIN, as I understand it, and others can address it. They did offer to a number of the property owners who were affected money and to replace the wells and to hook up on town water when it was available.
And they don't have to pay for their water now, those people?
No, they pay for town water.
Yeah, but my point is,
They may have made arrangements with OLIN that I'm not aware of, but they do pay for town water.
has anybody determined the net worth of OLIN, if it's in the billions or trillions? Have you guys examined their financial status to see exactly how much this company is worth?
There's a financial assurance requirement as part of the settlement. In this case, they had to guarantee, don't quote me on the amount, but something like $10 million. So they've guaranteed that. Beyond that, we haven't done a comprehensive, evaluation of what their net worth is, no.
What's bothersome to me is what the manager just said. These people have to now pay for their town water. That to me is like to get shafted twice.
And I don't think that's what, the town manager said. What he said is he's not privy.
Paying for the town water.
We said someone maybe. He said Olin maybe.
$10 million,
Yep.
now these people got to pay for their water.
I'm not aware of anyone, okay, just to be clear, I'm not aware of anyone right now paying for town water as a result of Olin. I'm not aware of that. He said that may happen. And I'm saying it, but right now, there's no one who's currently impacted. In the past, you're right, Mike, I guess there were a couple of homes on Main Street that Olin did buy their water rights out. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean they cut them a check? I don't know. All I care about is that they're no longer exposed. Now, are they getting financially shafted? I don't know. I don't know historically what happened there. This gentleman had raised his hand before.
My name is Mike Raymond. I'm on the City Council of Rubin. And I want to address one of our concerns. We're concerned about the whole project. I've been involved right from the beginning. And one of our concerns is the East Ditch. The East Ditch, we believe that the East Ditch enters into the town of Boston, enters into Falls Brook. Right now, the industrial flex site is in the final stage.
Right close to it.
Okay. Right now, the industrial flex is in the final stages of being cleaned up. The private responsible party will come up with work plans. The work plans are going to be reviewed, and that will be done. The plan is a sound plan. But if the East Ditch is emptying into Hall's Brook, this will continue to contaminate the area that's being cleaned up. So that's one of our concerns. And that's what I wanted to mention. When you started talking about the East Ditch, you started talking about, you said, well, it's fuzzy, it's a fuzzy area. Well, we approached the project manager for the industrial, and they said the same thing. So it's a gray area between the two sites right now. But at the same time, I think the health agent who was here tonight, I asked him to confirm. The Rubin landfill itself borders the Olin property. We have 15 test wells around the landfill, and we test twice a year. And our test results from the landfill, going into the landfill brook, are pretty good. In fact, to the point where we're going to ask for a reduction in tests because our testing is so good. But the problem we have is that our brook empties into the same spot where the East Ditch travels under to New Boston Street, and that we're finding it to be highly contaminated right at that spot. So, and what we don't want to happen is more contamination going to something that's being cleaned up. And that's happening to our
Yeah, no, it's, and I'll just respond. I do, Joe LeMay, who's the project manager for the Industrialplex site for EPA, he and I have spoken, and, you know, we agree that, you know, there's ammonia clearly coming from the OLIN site in the East Ditch. Question is that making it all the way down into the new Boston drainage way? And of course now they're cleaning up part of the Industrialplex site for ammonia. So the question is there ongoing release coming from OLIN? And that, it's just not enough, that needs more data, and we're going to look at
But our
that.
health agent has volunteered to give you any of the testing that has been done in our area. If you want to go and talk to him, I'll get you his card.
Yes. Yes, I do.
He'll give you copies of all the tests so that you can use that as part of your data.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Jim. I have several concerns, but the first one I wanted to ask you about is, does the EPA in other parts of the country, I believe that I've read stories about it, that they're having a hard time getting the PRPs to step up to the plate and do some testing, that the EPA can actually do the testing and actually build the PRPs. Our water supply has been shut off since 2003, it's 2008. It's been 5 years. We've missed a 5-year gap in testing in the aquifer. Not only that, I believe they haven't tested for private wells for the last 5 years, and I hear a lot of concerns about private well testing. And it's kind of hard to say whether these people are at risk or not at risk, because the hydrology of the aquifer has obviously changed. You don't have the public water supply drawing, contaminants like it used to, so there could be a change. Of course, we don't know because there hasn't been a study yet. It's 5 years down the road. I'm going to ask the EPA, I'm going to press you guys to do something about that. I'm very aware and familiar and been educated, if you want to call it that, on how everything takes a long time. It is very frustrating. I mean, we've probably been involved in this for close to 10 years. And now we hear it's going to be another 5 years before we even get to the cleanup stage. I don't think you can wait that long. I personally don't think that you're going to get OLIN to test out in the aquifer anytime soon. And I don't think you're going to get them to test with private wells anytime soon. So I'm going to press the EPA to do it instead, because we need that data. So that's my question and my comment. You can, I guess, take it any way that you want to take it, because I know that there was some comments from Jim about the doing another aquifer study, which obviously needs to be done without the hydrology of the wells being impacted. So, but I mean, what's the time frame for that? 5 years? I mean, that's crazy. I hate to say it's crazy. So is the EPA going to do some of that testing and then build the PRPs?
First of all, our agreement does give us the ability to do our own testing and build the PRPs. That's built into the settlement already. So we could do that. And in fact, we may. At this point, 5 years seems like a long time, and I guess it could be. Right now, groundwater. I mean, people have this perception that groundwater, moves like water out of a faucet. Groundwater moves, very slowly. Yes, it does change, and yes, with those wells shut off, as I said during my presentation, we are concerned that now the extent of the plume, could expand further. I mean, you have these wells kind of holding it in place, if you will. You shut them off, something's going to change probably with the volume of water that was going through those wells. But it's going to move feet per year, not hundreds of feet, not thousands of feet. Water testing's definitely in the future. I can't say, exactly when. It's not years off. Cleanup plan is probably years off. The testing further testing in the aquifer and of the private wells is probably later this year, may slip into next year. But it's not, years off. The cleanup itself I would say it's probably. But there's testing that goes on along the way. So I hear your concern, and we'll certainly, work with you moving forward on that.
Especially with NDMA, because we still don't know the source of the NDMA. We don't know for sure the source. We're all speculating on what the source is, but we don't know what the source is. And if you don't know what the source is, then you don't know how fast it's going to travel or where it is right now, and how much those wells have an impact on how the NDMA traveled through the aquifer. Because it may not even be associated with the DAPL. We just don't know that.
Right.
I guess that was pretty much my comment was about the time frames, and I know the EPA is doing their best to work with what they have. I'm very familiar with how OLIN is masters of the process and masters of dragging their feet. And I know you have a lot to deal with, and that's why I'm saying I think we need to press the EPA to press OLIN a little harder and to maybe take up, at least for the private wells at this time, some testing, and to at least give those people some assurity that they're not being contaminated themselves by the private well. So that's what I asked the EPA tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to respond to this gentleman's question about the private drinking water, following up to what Suzanne said. I think it would be appropriate if the EPA could develop a handout that would include the EPA method numbers and container types and preservative types. And the individuals themselves may not know how to do that, but if they were, I don't know if I need that. With a handout, that would give the private well owners an option if they want to pay for their own testing. Give a specific list of what you're supposed to test for, rather than just as generic, test. Maybe we could develop a handout that actually include the EPA method numbers, like I said.
No, it's a good suggestion.
Other thing, just to raise it, Kevin's brought this up a lot of times before, and I think it's going to make people nervous about the well installations. There's a specific procedure where typically the wells are grouted with a bentonite, Portland cement slurry that inhibits that kind of migration.
Right.
Typically, well screens are only 10 feet long, and if you have to sample 80 feet, you would have multiple wells for lots of sampling, and so all that's taken care of. And he's raised that question a lot of times. He's probably making people nervous by keeping saying that. He just should. Well, it's not a problem, really.
Yeah, it's a good question, but we, like I said, that's the way we install our wells. Historically, I can't speak to how the wells were installed here. We have all the information. Have I looked at the driller's log for each of the 200 wells yet? No.
I'm just trying to throw out the answer so we can stop hearing the question.
Right.
That the wells are installed in such a manner that it's usually not a problem.
Right.
And,
that's true.
And the reasons why, perhaps Mike Webster would actually have seen all the logs and can just answer the question quickly that he knows they were grouted or they used barcads or there was some other kind of a mechanism by there were no aquiclues or aquatards or any kind of impermeable barriers that were punctured, and just we can stop hearing the question. And my personal question is the DAPL pilot extraction study. Any estimate at all? I mean, we've been waiting for that for a long time. I know it's on the list, but any projected schedule as to when we might see it actually happen?
Construction should begin by the end of this calendar year. That's the latest estimate. Yeah.
I just want to say that like all the ceiling tiles in the tunnel were all installed properly until they fell and killed the lady. So, this guy here probably is trusting people a lot more than I do.
Talk about risk assessment.
She's going to just stand to the microphone then, if you don't mind.
You're talking about the risk assessment for the property. I know you have the property divided into a few different sections.
Right.
The risk assessments vary in the different sections of the property, or will include the whole thing, including off-site migration risk assessment?
It'll include, the site is split into different areas because of its size and complexity. There'll be, there'll be more than one risk assessment in a case like this, but there'll probably be one for the on-site, so it'll be by media most likely. Be one for the on-site soil, to capture someone trespassing, walking across the site. One for the deeper soil, for any future workers excavating, working on that property. There'll be one for recreational users, people might walk through the wetland areas. And there'll be one for what I consider the most important one, potential people who ingest groundwater, based on the highest concentrations. It's somewhat theoretical because we're not aware of anyone doing that.
And the risk assessment will determine the possible future use of the property?
The risk assessment is an important component of future use because it looks at current risks, which, like I said, I'm not aware of anyone currently exposed. Biggest concern would be ongoing private well users. Keep a close eye on that. But it also looks at future risks. How do you look at future risks? If this site were redeveloped as a daycare or as private homes, the risk assessment for the future potential exposure looks a lot different than if it were developed as a commercial piece of property. So the two are linked. It doesn't determine what the future use will be, but it estimates risk based on what we believe based on current data the future use may be.
So if, for instance, it were to be a trash transfer station, the cleanup would be less stringent than if it were a daycare. Or if we had our water supply turned on, the cleanup or remained a possible source of income for the town, and drinking water for the town, or industrial use for the town that's saleable, then the cleanup would require more based on that use. Now, trying to keep as much value of the town of Wilmington as we can, we will get the best cleanup available, and the risk assessment is going to be a huge factor in the future of that property in the town.
The risk assessment is a key point. I've told members of work that, I've told folks here that it is.
And I do think that they realize that, but I don't think that the general public realizes that, and how important it is that the community did come together and sit in town meeting to hire GeoInsights independently to continue to stay involved in this site because it means so much to the community. The other thing is you talked about Superfund sites and Congress giving the public a voice in this. Channel 5 just recently did a story last week on testing for water supplies, be it a public water supply or a private well. Government is not real quick to act when it comes to testing for the contaminants that aren't regulated and are posing a risk to public health. Hopefully those things will change, but right now they haven't. Particularly the Channel 5 news story was on pharmaceuticals and the very minute breakdown products, including some of these chemicals from OLIN. And the other industrial processes that were done in the area and the wastewater. Mostly today, a lot of us are drinking wastewater. And so, like the Merrimack River, you know, granted we've treated it to a certain standard, but we haven't necessarily looked for what's there. What I would like to see happen, and I've always wanted to see happen, and so have the residents of this community, particularly when they saw the high rates of child cancers, is they wanted quicker intervention from their government. If not local, state, if not state, federal. And unfortunately, it doesn't come quickly. It's something you have to really stay on top of. And even today, we still have these large gaps in looking at the water supplies and what can be done to improve them. Because most of the watersheds today are wastewater. You know, and when people do their testing, I think that's something that the testing lab is going to want to know. Is it a drinking water supply or is it wastewater? And technically, it's wastewater if you're within that plume. And it does make a difference on the testing. Now, when you give them the list of COCs, you're going to give them basically what's regulated, and then you're going to give them a couple of markers. But it's not going to include...
I'll just stop you. I mean, for a typical water supply, you're absolutely true. Here, under Superfund, we test far beyond what's on the standard water supply list. Just as I mean, we do. The list is far more vast. And when we go out and look at the private wells now, we'll be testing not for chemicals on the standard list. We'll be testing for the chemicals that we know are originating from OLIN and have the greatest propensity to mobilize and are the most toxic. So I mean, we'll be truly, I mean, we have that ability under Superfund. Under the water supply program, I entirely agree with you. I understand that issue.
Did you say that EPA is going to say the private wells?
Yes.
of the residents in the community?
Potentially impacted ones, yes.
What was his question?
Isn't EPA going to test the potentially impacted private wells? And we will, and we'll sample them for, the chemicals that we know are originating from OLIN that have, chemicals move at different rates in the aquifer. We'll test for the ones that are most mobile and also have the highest toxicity. NDMA seems to be the one that kind of falls in both of those categories right now. NDMA isn't on your standard water supply sampling list, and I think that's what you're talking about.
No, not just the NDMA.
No, other ones too, but just for
Yeah,
example.
NDMA will be soon tested in transport from MWRA water as well.
Right.
So it's a currently new thing that we're realizing. What really bothered me is we all knew that Olin hit our water supply, yet we couldn't take, we're the third leading manufacturing town in the state. We have Coke membrane here who gets all kinds of awards for treating water. We have a number of wonderful companies in Wilmington, and then a number of not so wonderful ones that want to bring in trash transfer stations without regulations, and that would be this company here. We would like to see them step up to the plate where they should have done years ago and do the full-scale testing that needed to be done and look at that water. Take that water and look under a microscope with it. You've got thousands of people being impacted by it. And now we're trying to handle things on a watershed approach issue, which is wonderful, but it's not moving quick enough. And I know Congress is looking at the EPA to try and hold the EPA more responsible. EPA is saying it's a state problem. The state is saying it's a local problem. The locals don't have the resources either. And that's the sad part in all this, is that the amount of time that our government has taken to act quickly on something like this. I know risk assessment is important. Try and keep a handle on it. If you keep the water supply as a source of income, hopefully it'll benefit the community. There'll be a higher cleanup, but there needed to be quicker intervention. And even now, you're talking 10, 20, 30, 50, that site will never be clean. People say it's a cleanup. It's not a cleanup. It's never going to be clean. But there might be a way to take care of that wastewater and still be a benefit to the community without making our town be a complete trash transfer station.
Just a quick question. In the free page of the site summary, it says contaminants in soil is one of the pesticides. Is there any history of pesticides being manufactured at the site, or the pesticides that are being found in the soil from the application of such at the site?
It is the latter. They're being found sporadically from on-site application for weed control historically. All right. Thank you.
Yes. Jim, I just had a question, a follow-up to Debbie's point, and I just wanted to make sure I understood what I believe to be the suggestion that was made, and that is that the whatever the future potential uses of the site are will either dictate or have a significant influence on the rigor of cleanup here. And I guess that doesn't, I'm struck if you're saying that if it's going to be, if we were to say that we want to use the site or reactivate our wells, that will then precipitate a higher level of cleanup than if the wells remain abandoned and if Olin sells the property for a transfer station. That seems to really encourage, I guess, Olin to use the property for purposes that will allow a lesser cleanup. Is that really the way this would play out?
No. Let me try to clarify it a little bit. Let me start with groundwater. That's a little easier. With groundwater, I mean, we always consistently strive to remediate groundwater. The goal is always, if you're in what Joe talked about, a GW1, an area designated as a potential drinking water source or an actual drinking water source, even though you can't use it anymore because it's been contaminated, we will strive to restore it so it's usable again. And that's certainly the case here. We're going to strive to reuse it. The aquifer study becomes important because that study that was done by IEP in 1990 kind of bifurcates the site. It says, well, the northern part of the site contributes to the Maple Meadow Brook aquifer. That's part of the watershed for the town's wells. But the southern part, it's feeding the Aberdeen water supply. It's moving in another direction. There's this divide or bloody gulch, or I forget the name of it, but there's some groundwater divide there. But we know for a fact that the groundwater from the southern part of the site, where the containment area is, did in fact move into the town wells. So that study, I think, is inherently flawed. It was probably fine at the time. It was based on best available information in 1990. We're going to update it through Mass DEP, see if that GW1 area is actually larger, like I would suggest it would be. Regardless, though, groundwater, we typically look to restore it. Always, if it's GW1, if it's GW2, it gets a little iffy. But the Maple Meadow Brook aquifer itself is clearly GW1. Question is, on the site, how much is GW1, how much is really GW2? Becomes an important issue moving down the line.
So is it fair to say that there's some baseline of effort in terms of restoration that's going to happen, whether the future use of that site is a transfer station or a daycare facility?
Well, let me talk about non-groundwater now. We're talking, soil and basically soil on site. And, Debbie brings up a good point that, the agency is required to clean up the site to the reasonably foreseeable future use. And why that is because when, the program is a risk assessment-based program. We don't compare the contaminant levels to generic background levels. We actually calculate based on what potential exposure may occur, to what level the site should be cleaned up to. So in other words, if you're going to build houses out there, you would clean it up to a residential scenario. You would assume that you're going to, dig a foundation 8-9 feet down to the ground. You're going to assume that you're going to put a garden in out back. You're going to assume there's going to be a swing set and a sandbox, swimming pool. Higher level of potential future exposure. You have a commercial property, not necessarily a transfer station, just a commercial property in general. You're not going to be digging foundations 8-9 feet down. You're not going to have people potentially exposed 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And those are real numbers that feed into the risk assessment. So it does become important. It does, to some degree, drive the cleanup. Because of that, it will be an integral part of the study moving forward. There is what they call a reuse assessment as part of the Superfund process. But the goal isn't to say, well, we want this commercial property located in this industrial park to now have 5 homes on it. The goal is to say, okay, well, the property is commercially zoned. Does that make sense? Is it in with keeping? Is it what the town now wants? So there is a look at it, but again, the purpose of the look is to come up with a reasonable, it's a reasonable test. So that's, and we'll explain that further when we get to that point. But it is a key point. It's appropriate to flag it, try to explain it better when we get there.
Jim, the residents want to know that they'll have input into what the future use of the land is going to be. Now, I brought that up at the last meeting, and you had confirmed it, but I don't think it's really truly understood that the risk assessment and the ultimate remediation of the property is determined by what the use of the property is going to be. The use of the property is determined by, could be civic groups, it could be the town, it could be a combination of the owners of the property. But it's decided before the risk assessment is put together. And please, make sure that everybody, I was clear on it last time, but listening to Debbie's description, some people must have left here not understanding that they are going to have, and that's going to be an important part of the risk assessment. It wasn't moving. We had a decision, and we had decisions to make on what we felt the future. We had input into when we did our initial risk assessment for this current plan. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an important point. It's a local decision. EPA doesn't say the site's going to be cleaned up and used as X, Y, or Z. We come out to the community, we meet with the town officials, and we decide that. At the end of the day, the property is privately owned. There's zoning regulations. That all needs to be taken into consideration. I'm sure that was done in Wilburn. It's done at all the sites. But there is community and local official input, and the decision rests with you guys, not with the agency. Suzanne.
Jim, how are you going to determine the aquifer study?
I'm just curious how you're going to determine the aquifer study when you have so many changes now than when the wells were on. So how accurate is it going to be according to how much, I mean, those wells were a huge draw, huge impact on the hydrology. So I'm not sure without those wells and without the old Altron wells, which were 100,000 gallons per day, which was directly down gradient of the site. I mean, how are you going to determine the current conditions and the past conditions and find out, you know, a GW, whether it's GW1? What if there's less GW1 on the site? What happens then?
Yeah. Good question. In fact, that aquifer study, it should be, it's not intended to find, I mean, ideally it would determine what the current watershed is today, or the day the study is done. My goal at this point, we know contamination moved from the Olin property into the town wells and into the Maple Meadow Brook aquifer and rests there today. The data, that's, you know, indisputable. The purpose of the study is simply to say, okay, we didn't have that data in 1990. Let's look at the data that's been collected since 1990 through the most current data set, which I think is like 2004. Let's look at that data and look at the water levels. Any water, you know, I say data, I don't mean just chemical data, I mean water levels too. And let's try to, you know, move the line based on that, based on the real data that's been collected since 1990 through now. So, yeah, it may have changed a little bit since 2004. If anything, it's probably moved, you know, further, but I fully expect that line has shifted. And I think that's what the study will show, but we need to look at it to verify that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Can we ask this town manager, what is the status of the trash transfer station at the moment?
You know, the question is, what's the status of the proposed trash transfer station?
Congress enacted legislation that essentially gives a year's reprieve, and we're urging the United States Senate and Senator Lautenberg for New Jersey has already reintroduced legislation to extend that. It's my understanding that by the end of October, that legislation is over, or the act itself is over. And so we have been trying to continue to come up with a legislative remedy. In the meantime, you know, we're dependent upon EPA to assist us as they go through this process, because I think time is money, and there are economic issues here for all these companies where it is becoming, I think, less economically feasible to go forward. I will tell you that the Board of Selectmen is fully committed to fighting the fight, so we're going to continue to do that. But we think probably the most expeditious way to do that is through Congress, and that's the way we work.
Anyone? Oh, yes.
I just want a clarification from the manager.
Sure.
What companies was he feeling it was difficult on? You mentioned that this is getting difficult on the companies. Which company were you talking about?
Yeah, we think that it's going to get more difficult for New England Transrail to hang in there as long as this thing gets dragged out. So that's a good thing as far as we're concerned. You know, they wanted to have that transfer operation up and running by now, and so from an economic perspective, they put you know, they have a great deal of money out there, and they're not getting any return on investment. So we're frankly hoping that the longer this thing delays, that they're going to end up going away and looking for some other place to locate their, trash facility. That said, that's just what we're hoping for. We're still, trying to go forward with both the legislative and the legal remedy.
I just have one other question now. Thanks. The gentleman from Woburn mentioned that there was a brook that's, I thought, if I'm not mistaken, that he said it was flowing into the east ditch. Is it my understanding that maybe even that brook and more brooks that are actually increasing the water impact on this site?
Well, yeah, the question is, are there brooks, someone mentioned the landfill brook, and the question, I believe, is, are there other impacts on the water? You mean groundwater or surface water? Or?
If you have a site right now that's been difficult to examine or figure out if it's staying the same as far as contaminant levels.
Right.
But there are brooks that are flowing into it. I'm wondering if I'm understanding it right, that there are brooks flowing into it that could be impacted further.
Not quite. The brooks don't flow in, but what happens is there's the east ditch that runs along the railroad, which is immediately adjacent to the east side of the OLIN property, and then that drains down to the south into what is largely known as the New Boston Drainage Way, which then feeds into that site in Woburn, which is known as the Industrialplex site. Along the way, along the east ditch, New Drainage Way, Boston Drainage, which is really the same water body. So it starts as the east ditch. At some point, the name transitions into the New Boston Drainage Way. There are two feeder brooks that come in. One's Hall's Brook, and then a little further to the south is Landfill Brook. And both feed into the New Boston Drainage Way. All those water bodies, and the real issue in this area is ammonia. And all these water bodies have had some level of ammonia in them. And in fact, the surface water down in Industrialplex, they just signed a cleanup plan to pump and treat the surface water down there because of ammonia contamination. They know they have a localized ammonia problem there from buried, I believe it's from buried hides from a long time ago. But the question is, do they have ongoing sources coming down? So really, that whole area hasn't really been looked at yet. The study really focused on the on-site property and the Maple Meadow Brook Aquifer, which were the two biggest problems. But there is this area to the south of the site. It's a large wetland area between the OLIN property and extending to the Woburn landfill. It's kind of this large wetland area, and there are those two surface water brooks, Landfill Brook, Halls Brook, and the concern that I have is that groundwater may be, seeping up and feeding ammonia into those surface water as an ongoing source. So it's something that needs to be looked at.
One of the thoughts that came to me was if those brooks are flowing and they're abutting the site, and they could be changing the water table level, is it possible that they could be piped instead of just free-flowing and affecting the groundwater?
Possibly, yeah. Could they be culverted at some point? And that is possible. In fact, there's a ditch on the other side of the OLIN property called the West Ditch, appropriately enough. And that was put into a culvert a few years ago when the slurry wall was constructed. And that solved some problems, but also created some additional problems. So you don't always have the anticipated endpoint when you do that. But that east ditch drainage way right now is largely just the drainage for the railroad. It's right along their railroad bed. It's on their property. They dredge it periodically. But it's going to have to be looked at. There isn't a lot of data there. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes.
Jim, I would just like to thank the folks here this evening for coming out. It's a really complicated process and obviously a complicated site.
On behalf of the Wilmington Environmental Restoration Committee, I invite you to be in contact with the folks listed on the screen, but also with those of us locally. We weren't really sure we're up for a 10-year commitment when we applied for the grant, but that's what it's sounding like tonight. But I'd be happy to chat with people for a few minutes afterwards, if people want to give me contact information, or Suzanne, or Kathy, Dick Patterson, Liz Harmon. We have a number of our members here tonight, and all of us are receptive if people want to give us suggestions. And I'd also like to ask, do you find this format useful and informative? Do you prefer to have a meeting like this rather than get an email saying, hey, this is what's going on, or some sort of written newsletter? Because it will help our group too when we want to reach out and try to meet with members of the public. So I appreciate just some sense from folks. You know, a show of hands, this is helpful to be in a meeting format like this. Jim. And also, Suzanne reminds me, we're in the process of getting a website developed, and we'll be providing information on that as it comes forward. It's wilmingtonerc.org. She's done a great job, at least with the preliminaries. So look us up and let us know that you're interested in hearing more. We appreciate it. Thanks.
With that,
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, of course.
Do you send out email information about, because when, I know that you had a sign-up sheet here the last time, and I know I listed my email, and I haven't seen anything, so I was just curious whether or not you communicate with folks.
And that's kind of our fault. We've been really focused on getting the organization set up and file with the state as a corporation, we have to file with the IRS for nonprofit status and so forth. We haven't even really had a real meeting since last September.
So the short answer is no, we haven't neglected you, Mike. We just haven't
I knew you wouldn't neglect that.
Well, we haven't sent out email to the people on the list because we just really haven't had any information.
Okay, I think people need to know that too, even if they're watching, because I'm sure you receive a number of email addresses, you know, the last
Yes,
time you
and we haven't.
And they should probably know that you haven't forgotten them, you just haven't.
Thank you. No, we haven't forgotten, we just aren't that organized yet.
And we really haven't had a lot of information to give to people because there hasn't been a lot of information out there yet. We're still kind of in standstill mode. So once the website comes up, we have those email lists, and we'll send emails out as newsletters and information is posted on the website to give everybody a heads up to get their information on the website, and there'll be contact information on the website. But there really hasn't been a whole heck of a lot to report on at this point, and the process has really been moving slowly.
with that, oh, yes.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
The EPA has a website, right?
Yes, it's
And they list the information. I actually think I got my information in the mail from you guys.
Yes.
So do you guys take the information here and make sure you hit everybody in the mailings list?
Yeah, well, yes, I mean,
Right, so.
before this meeting, we sent out.
People that come in and sign in, get notified from the EPA.
Correct.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that works quite
Yes.
well. Okay.
Yes, Sarah will take the list now and update it with any names that are on there that weren't on there previously. And we continue to do that throughout the process.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back to the site is, Superfund site. Does that, keep Olin from, being sued by the town?
No.
So if our selectmen get fed up with, you know, the slow progress here, and they wanted to just end, you know, cuddling up to them, and just say, hey, it's time for you to, pay up. That can go forward without any type of preventive laws or statutes that keep them from.
No. Yeah, it doesn't protect OLIN or EPA from any third-party suits. It protects us from suing them and them from suing us. That's it. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming out, and I look forward to the night when I can come out here and tell you we're cleaning it up. Hopefully I'll still have hair.